Good day everyone. To continue the report, we are now going to tackle about Aaron Beck's cognitive theory. As a result of his research on depression, Aaron T. Beck developed an approach known as cognitive theory. Cognitive theory was developed around 1950s to 1960s, the same time that Ellis was developing his REBT. Cognitive therapy views psychological problems as the result of everyday processes such as faulty thinking, making incorrect interpretations on the basis of an inadequate or incorrect information, and failing to distinguish between fantasy and reality. This type of theory is insight focused, with a strong psychoeducational component that emphasizes recognizing and changing unrealistic negative thoughts and maladaptive beliefs. It is highly collaborative. An all-in participation of the client and the therapist is needed because this therapy involves specific learning experiences to help clients monitor their automatic thoughts, examine the validity of their automatic thoughts, understand the relationship among cognition, feelings, and behavior, develop more accurate and realistic cognitions, and change underlying beliefs and assumptions. Basic principles of cognitive therapy. Individuals have a strong tendency to hold on to their essential beliefs about themselves, their world, and their future. Beck contends that people with emotional difficulties tend to commit characteristic logical errors that distort objective reality. Cognitive therapy's main goal is to help clients examine and restructure their underlying beliefs. Automatic thoughts are personalized notions that are triggered by particular stimuli that lead to emotional responses. For example, when you hear a noise behind the door of your bedroom at night, quick thoughts or images immediately enter our mind. Cognitive distortions are systematic errors in reasoning that lead to faulty assumptions and misconceptions. Beck included 5 cognitive distortions in his original list published in 1963 and added an additional 2 in Cognitive Therapy of Depression, which was published in 1979. The first one is arbitrary inference. It is the process of forming an interpretation of an event, experience, or situation when there is no factual evidence to support the conclusion or where the conclusion is contrary to the evidence. For example, as Jaysar walked down the street, he thought to himself, "Everyone can tell that I'm a loser." This thought is distorted for a number of reasons. Jaysar has no way of knowing what everyone thinks, and it is extremely unlikely that anybody is even thinking about him since most people are likely to be wrapped up in their own concerns. The second one is selective abstraction. This is the process of focusing on a detail taken out of context, ignoring other salient features of the situation, and conceptualizing the whole experience on the basis of this element. For example, Monica delivered some teaching at her workplace and got a round of applause at the end, as well as numerous people saying how well she did and how helpful they had found her presentation. When she looked at the feedback forms, she noticed one form with critical comments and a poor rating. She couldn't stop thinking about this feedback and criticized herself, saying, "I'm such a rubbish teacher." Monica's thinking is distorted in this case because she has automatically focused on the one negative piece of feedback to the exclusion of all positive feedback. Her judgment of her teaching was not a fair reflection of the evidence. The third one is overgeneralization. This is the process of drawing a general conclusion about their ability, performance, or worth on the basis of a single incident. For example, Jeremy gets a C- on a piece of homework and thinks to himself, "I'm going to fail everything," and feels hopeless. Jeremy's thinking is distorted in this case because the conclusion he is reaching is too broad given the evidence. It is equally plausible that his C- is a blip and that he will do well on the tests in the future, or that there were good reasons why he got a poor grade this time that he could remedy in the future. Magnification and minimization. These are errors in evaluation which are so gross as to constitute distortions. Example of magnification: Julia's baby is sick on her only clean shirt before she has to go to work to give a presentation. She has an image of her boss noticing, giving her a disgusted look, and firing her on the spot. Julia's thinking, an image in this case, is an example of magnification because she is imagining and paying attention to a worst case scenario. Example of minimization. TJ's friend was the third person to try to tell him that he thought TJ was drinking too much and putting himself in danger. TJ dismissed his concerns by saying, "You're like everyone else, you worry too much," and thought to himself, "I don't know what they're all so worried about." Personalization describes the patient's proclivity to relate external events to oneself when there is no basis for making such connection. For example, on Donna's journey to work, she steps in a puddle, realizes she has forgotten her watch, and has to rush after her train is late. She thinks, "The world has got it in for me," and feels deflated. Naturally, Donna has placed herself at the center of the story. We all tend to be somewhat egocentric, but her thinking is biased because she has assigned agency to the world around her, and she is implicitly making the prediction that the world will continue to have it in for her. Labeling and mislabeling. It involves portraying one's identity on the basis of imperfections and mistakes made in the past and allowing them to define one's true identity. So, for example, if you are not able to live up to all of a client's expectations, you might tell yourself, "I'm totally worthless and should turn my professional license in right away." Lastly, dichotomous. It is the tendency to place all experiences in one of two opposite categories. For example, flawless or defective, immaculate or filthy, saint or sinner. A situational example of dichotomous: Jake either did things perfectly or not at all. If he saw the slightest speck of dust at home, he saw it as filthy. He was similarly strict with descriptions of himself. He was either doing okay or was failing in every way. His thinking is biased because he fails to see life in the shades of gray that it actually operates. REBT and CT have many similarities and at the same time differences in their approach, therapeutic methods, and style. For instance, REBT is frequently directive, persuasive, and confrontational, and it emphasizes the therapist's function as a teacher. The therapist models rational thinking and assists clients in recognizing and disputing irrational views. CT, on the other hand, employs a Socratic dialogue in which clients are asked open-ended questions with the goal of getting them to think on personal issues and come to their own conclusions. CT focuses more on assisting clients in identifying their own misconceptions. The cognitive therapist strives to work with clients in verifying the validity of their cognitions, a method called as collaborative empiricism, through this reflective questioning process. Also, Beck's cognitive therapy tends to view the belief of his clients as more inaccurate rather than irrational. To test the client's accuracy of their beliefs, he asks them to conduct behavioral experiments. Ellis REBT tends to persuade that some beliefs of his clients are irrational and non-functional. In client-therapist relationship, the therapist is a teacher in Ellis REBT. Rapport is not essential between the client and therapist. In contrast to Beck's cognitive therapy, therapeutic relationship is the application of cognitive therapy. Empathy, sensitivity, and technical competence is the key to being an effective therapist. Moreover, in Rogers' person-centered therapy, it agrees that creating and establishing connections between the therapist and client is a necessary first step in cognitive therapy. Without a working relationship, applying techniques will not be effective, especially with clients who are difficult to reach. In applications of cognitive therapy programs have been designed for all ages and for a variety of client populations. It initially gained recognition as an approach to treating depression, but extensive research has also been devoted to the study and treatment for many other psychiatric disorders. These are the list of successfully treated disorders by cognitive therapy. Cognitive techniques focus on identifying and examining a client's beliefs, exploring the origins of these beliefs, and modifying them if the client cannot support these beliefs. Activity scheduling, skills training, role-playing, behavioral experiments, exposure therapy, and behavioral rehearsal are examples of behavioral techniques typically used by cognitive therapists. For instance, the therapist would have you become aware of the distortions in your thinking patterns by examining your automatic thoughts. The therapist would ask you to look at your inferences, which may be faulty, and may investigate whether these inferences can be traced back to earlier experiences in your life. Then the therapist would help you see how you sometimes come to a conclusion when evidence for such a conclusion is either lacking or based on distorted information from the past. In Beck's research, he believes that depression do not result from anger turned inward. Instead, he challenged this concept by focusing on the content of the depressive's negative thinking and biased interpretation of events. Beck developed the concept of the cognitive triad as a pattern that triggers depression. The triad refers to thoughts about self, world, and future. In the first component, clients hold a negative view about themselves. They blame their setbacks on personal inadequacies without considering circumstantial explanations. They are convinced that they lack the qualities essential to bring them happiness. The second component of the triad consists of the tendency to interpret their personal world in a negative manner. Depressed people focus on certain facts that confirm their negative conclusions, a process referred to as selective abstraction by Beck. The last component of the triad pertains to depressed clients' gloomy vision and projections of the future. They expect their present difficulties to continue and they anticipate only failure in the future. The cognitive therapy approach to treating depressed clients focuses on specific problem areas and the reasons clients give for their symptoms. To assess the depth of depression, Beck designed a standardized device known as the Beck Depression Inventory. It is a 21-item self-report rating inventory that measures characteristic attitudes and symptoms of depression. Some of the behavioral symptoms of depression are inactivity, withdrawal, and avoidance. In application to family therapy, the cognitive behavioral approach focuses on family interaction patterns and family relationships. Cognitions, emotions, and behavior are viewed as exerting a mutual influence on one another. A cognitive inference can evoke emotion and behavior, and emotion and behavior can likewise influence cognition in a reciprocal process that sometimes serve to maintain the dysfunction of the family unit. Schema or core beliefs is heavily emphasized in cognitive therapy. It is a key aspect of the therapeutic process to restructure. It has a pivotal impact on changing dysfunctional behaviors. Family schemata are jointly held beliefs about the family that have formed as a result of years of integrated interaction among members of the family unit. It is the experiences and perceptions from the family and families in general. These schemata have a major impact on how the individual thinks, feels, and behaves in the family system. Now, let us proceed to Donald Mishenbaum's cognitive behavior modification. Donald Mishenbaum's cognitive behavior modification is another major alternative for REBT, which focuses on changing the client's self-statements. Donald's CBM approach combines some of the best elements of behavior therapy and cognitive therapy. Self-statements affect a person's behavior in much the same way as statements made by another person. Basic principle of CBM is that clients, as a prerequisite to behavior change, must notice how they think, feel, and behave, and the impact they have on others. For the change to occur, clients need to interrupt the scripted nature of their behavior so that they can evaluate their own behavior in various situations. This approach shares with REBT and Beck's cognitive therapy assumption that distressing emotions are typically the result of maladaptive thoughts. REBT is more direct and confrontational in uncovering and disputing irrational thoughts, whereas Mishenbaum's self-instructional training focuses more on helping clients become aware of their self-talk and the stories they tell about themselves. The therapeutic process consists of teaching clients to make self-statements and training clients to modify the instructions they give to themselves so that they can cope more effectively with the problems they encounter. Cognitive restructuring plays a central role in Mishenbaum's self-instructional training. Mishenbaum proposes that behavior change occurs through a sequence of mediating processes involving the interaction of inner speech, cognitive structures, and behaviors, and their resultant outcomes. He describes a three-phase process of change in which those three aspects are interwoven. According to him, focusing on only one aspect will probably prove insufficient. The beginning step in the change process consists of clients learning how to observe their own behavior. When clients begin therapy, their internal dialogue is characterized by negative self-statements and imagery. A critical factor is their willingness and ability to listen to themselves. This process involves an increased sensitivity to their thoughts, feelings, actions, physiological reactions, and ways of reacting to others. If depressed clients hope to make constructive changes, for example, they must first realize that they are not victims of negative thoughts and feelings. Rather, they are actually contributing to their depression through the things they tell themselves. Although self-observation is necessary if change is to occur, it is not sufficient for change. As therapy progresses, clients acquire new cognitive structures that enable them to view their problems in a new light. This reconceptualization process comes about through a collaborative effort between client and therapist. Phase 2 is starting a new internal dialogue. As a result of the early client-therapist contacts, clients learn to notice their maladaptive behaviors, and they begin to see opportunities for adaptive behavioral alternatives. If clients hope to change what they are telling themselves, they must initiate a new behavioral chain, one that is incompatible with their maladaptive behaviors. Clients learn that psychological distress is a function of the interdependence of cognitions, emotions, behaviors, and resultant consequences. In therapy, clients learn to change their internal dialogue, which serves as a guide to new behavior. The third and last phase of the modification process consists of helping clients interrupt the downward spiral of thinking, feeling, and behaving, and teaching them more adaptive ways of coping using the resources they bring to therapy. Clients learn more effective coping skills which are practiced in real-life situations. For example, clients who can't cope with failure may avoid appealing activities for fear of not succeeding at them. Cognitive restructuring can help them change their negative view, thus making them more willing to engage in desired activities. At the same time, Clients continue to focus on telling themselves new sentences and observing and assessing the outcomes. As they behave differently in situations, they typically get different reactions from others. The stability of what they learn is greatly influenced by what they say to themselves about their newly acquired behavior and its consequences. In stress inoculation training, we are going to watch a video by Donald Mishenboom's interview.
Stress inoculation and its variations has emerged as one of the key treatment modalities for people who have anger and aggressive problems. It's now been employed with combat vets, with prisoners, with adolescent offenders, and there are a number of analog studies with college students. It's been applied to people who have rage, driving rage, and this is California. Come on, where else is this kind of treatment needed? The stress inoculation has three components, okay? The first component is to develop a therapeutic alliance and conduct psychoeducation. It is designed to develop a supportive relationship where you can do collaborative goal setting, where you can educate people about the triggers, the emotions, the cognitions, the thinking processes, the behavior, and how they get caught up in that. It isn't like you do education and you do treatment. These are highly intertwined. Not only that, the treatment tries to include both assessment and treatment together. So it's not like you do assessment and then you do treatment. You're going to have collaborative goals that you're going to assess on a regular basis. So the first part of this stress inoculation training has to do with the education of the client and significant others. The second is the skills application. And sometimes people bring in skills. So you're going to collaborate with them to learn a variety of skills to break this vicious cycle of how to appraise events, how to conduct some control, to develop control on emotional self-regulation, whether these are relaxation to dampen the arousal, whether it has to do with acceptance kinds of strategies, whether it's cognitive restructuring. So we're going to teach skills that focus in on emotionality, that focus in on cognition, and that focus in on behavioral elements. The third phase, which is really critical, is application training. You want to make the training as similar to the real-life situation as possible. So one of the things that becomes really interesting is that we could have rehearsal within the session. We could use imagery rehearsal. We could have graded in vivo exposure. We can get you to perform personal experiments. In fact, if you stay with the concept of inoculation, like a medical inoculation, you can actually see the degree to which an individual can be exposed to lower doses of provocations and learn coping skills. This could be done both on a treatment basis and on a preventative basis. So if you go to the Melissa Institute website, you could read about how stress inoculation training has been used in the Israeli Defense Forces, with soldiers, with policemen. So think about people who have to deal with this on a day-to-day basis. And what is it that you would like those individuals to do, both at an individual and group level, in order to notice, to catch, to interrupt that behavioral cycle?
These are my references and thank you for listening.